Goreng wakes up in a prison cell and notices an old man sitting nearby. As they start talking, the old man wonders what food they'll get today, explaining that it will be the leftovers from the people above them on floor 47. Curious, Goreng peers down through the rectangular hole in the center of their floor. He sees that the floors below follow the same layout, and the ones above are arranged the same way. Goreng tries to shake the old man's hand, but the man refuses and introduces himself as Trimagasi. Trimagasi tells Goreng that being on level 48 is lucky, and they'll stay on this level for a month. However, realizing he has shared too much, Trimagasi becomes cautious since he knows nothing about Goreng. Suddenly the red light turns off, and the green light comes on, leaving Goreng confused about its meaning. Moments later, a platform lowers, carrying leftover food from the floors above. Trimagasi immediately starts eating, but Goreng finds the idea of eating scraps disgusting. Instead, he takes an apple to save for later. As soon as the platform descends to the lower levels, the temperature in their cell begins to rise. Trimagasi warns Goreng that food can only be eaten while the platform is present. If he tries to keep any, the temperature will either keep rising till they die or drop dangerously low till they freeze to death. Hearing this, Goreng throws the apple below and the temperature goes back to normal. The next day, Goreng still refuses to eat anything from the platform. Curious about Trimagasi's story, he asks why he ended up in the prison. Trimagasi explains that one day he saw an advertisement on TV promoting a knife sharpener that can make a knife even cut through a brick, and decided to buy it. But the very next day, the same company aired an ad for knives that could sharpen themselves. Furious at having wasted his money, Trimagasi threw his TV out the window in a fit of rage. Unfortunately, the TV fell on an illegal immigrant below, killing him. That's how Trimagasi ended up here. Goreng asks Trimagasi how many levels there are. Trimagasi admits he isn't sure but reveals that he was once on level 132, with even more levels below. Shocked, Goreng wonders how Trimagasi could have survived so far down, as no food would remain by the time the platform reached those levels. Goreng tries shouting at the people above, begging them to ration the food, but they ignore him. He then attempts to talk to the people below, asking them to be patient, but they angrily demand that more food be left for them. In response, Trimagasi casually urinates on them. Goreng is horrified by the act. Still shaken, he asks Trimagasi what item he chose to bring with him. With a grin, Trimagasi shows him the knife he bought from the advertisement, the same one that started it all. The next day, as Goreng was reading his book, a body suddenly fell from the level above, startling him. Trimagasi, however, remained completely unfazed. Shaken, Goreng asked him about it, and Trimagasi explained that on the higher levels, people have too many choices, causing their minds to spiral. Some of them can't handle it and end their lives. Later, the platform descended again, but this time, a deranged-looking woman was sitting on it. Curious, Goreng asked about her, and Trimagasi explained that she comes down once a month, searching for her child. Each month, she kills her cellmate, hoping that her child will be assigned as her next companion. Goreng tried to talk to the woman, but she seemed uninterested. As the platform lowered further, two men on a lower level grabbed her, attempting to molest her. Goreng shouted at them, telling them to leave her alone. Moments later, the platform returned, now stained with blood. The woman sat calmly, her face expressionless, indicating she had killed both men. Goreng began to suspect that Trimagasi might have killed his previous cellmate when he was on level 132 to survive. However, Trimagasi denied it, explaining that he didn't need to, as someone had fallen onto his floor from above, providing him with enough to eat. Goreng gradually accepted his grim reality and began eating from the platform. As days passed, he grew closer to Trimagasi, forming an uneasy bond. One night, Trimagasi warned Goreng to prepare himself. It was the last day of the month, and soon a gas would be released to knock them unconscious and transfer them to a new level. Trimagasi admitted that he had grown fond of Goreng and wished they could remain cellmates. He feared that he wouldn't survive long without Goreng by his side. The next day, Goreng woke up to a horrifying discovery. He was tied to his bed. Struggling to free himself, he realized that Trimagasi had bound him. They had been moved to level 171, far below any chance of getting food from the platform. Desperate to survive the last 2 months until his release, Trimagasi decided to restrain Goreng. He plans to slice Goreng's body to ensure he gets his food intake. Goreng yelled at Trimagasi to let him go, desperately trying to convince him that the death of the illegal immigrant wasn't his fault. He argued that if Trimagasi killed him, he would be solely responsible for that death. Goreng pleaded with him, suggesting that they could survive on water alone, but Trimagasi showed no interest in his reasoning. As a week went by, Goreng grew weaker and paler, suffering from the lack of food and water. His strength dwindled, and his situation became increasingly dire. Finally, Trimagasi prepared to execute his grim plan, ready to do whatever it took to survive. As Trimagasi sliced Goreng's leg, he screamed in pain. Just then, Goreng saw the deranged woman being lowered on the platform again. She suddenly attacked Trimagasi and freed Goreng from his restraints. In a fit of fear and desperation, Goreng seized the knife and stabbed Trimagasi, killing him. The women sliced Trimagasi's body and started eating it. She gave some to Goreng as well. She then took some of the meat with her as supplies and left. Goreng took care of his wound and lied down. As the days passed, Trimagasi's body began to rot, and Goreng succumbed to his desperate situation, feeding off his former cellmate to survive. The extreme conditions took a toll on his mind, causing him to hallucinate. He saw visions of Trimagasi and the deranged woman, the latter appearing to him as if they were physically together. When the end of the month arrived, Goreng awoke to find himself on level 33, accompanied by a woman and her dog. The woman greeted him by name, which filled Goreng with doubt since he hadn't revealed his name to her. Suddenly, he remembered her. She was the same woman who had interviewed him before he entered the prison. During that interview, she had asked about his favorite food, to which he had replied that snails were his favorite, as they were a delicacy in France. Back in the prison, the woman introduced herself as Imogiri. She explained that she had come to the facility voluntarily. She explained how the pit, officially called the Vertical Self-Management Center, was designed to promote solidarity. There were 200 floors in total, and if the prisoners distributed food fairly, it would be enough for everyone. However, Goreng was already skeptical, believing the system was hopelessly flawed. Imogiri revealed that only individuals over 16 years of age were sent to the pit, and began to divide her rations, one half for herself, the other half for her dog. To try and make a difference, Imogiri attempted to convince the people on the lower levels to serve equally sized portions for those below them. However, her appeals were met with indifference and scorn. It wasn't until Goreng threatened to defecate on the food that the prisoners on the lower levels reluctantly complied. One day, the platform brought the deranged woman frequently traveling down the levels, who this time was too weak to move on her own. Goreng and Imogiri laid her on the bed to let her recover from her injuries. That night, however, the starving women killed and ate Imogiri's dog. Goreng tried to comfort the devastated Imogiri, explaining that the woman likely acted out of desperation, thinking she needed to survive for the sake of her child. A child she claimed was somewhere in the pit. But even Imogiri, who had worked closely with the system, was deeply shaken by the cruel reality of what the pit did to people. She had entered the pit, hoping to make a difference. But after the death of her pet, she lost all hope and fell into a deep depression. During the final meal of the month, Goreng discovered snails on the platform, the very dish he had ordered during his interview. The next morning, he awoke on the 202nd floor. He soon realized that Imogiri, who had once insisted that the pit only had 200 floors, had taken her own life. Voices of the dead prisoners haunted Goreng, urging him to consume Imogiri's body. With his sanity fraying at the edges, he ultimately did what was necessary to survive. A month passed, and Goreng found himself on level 6, sharing the space with a new neighbor named Baharad. Baharad had brought a rope with him, intending to climb out of the pit. A devout believer in God, Baharad explained that it was divine will guiding him to climb upward. He managed to convince the prisoners on the level above to secure the rope so he could climb to their floor, but instead, they mocked him and let go of the rope, nearly causing him to fall into the endless shaft. Goreng recognized that Baharad wasn't just concerned with survival, he had ideals and a sense of purpose. Inspired by this, Goreng convinced Baharad to descend the platform together, armed with the idea of guarding the food to ensure that those on the lower levels could finally receive rations. By Goreng's estimate, the pit extended to at least 250 floors. They knew the descent would be suicidal, but believed that if they could deliver food to the bottom, they could break the system. However, if their plan failed and they ran out of food, they would remain on the platform and ascend with it. The two companions armed themselves with metal bars from dismantled bed frames and fought fiercely to protect the food as they descended, battling prisoners on each level. Eventually, they encountered Baharad's former mentor, who recognized him immediately. The teacher admonished them, saying that they were stepping on precious food and needed to articulate their message clearly to the prisoners below, rather than simply using violence. He suggested that they send a message to the administration, one that would unmistakably convey the flaws of the pit's system. The pit's system had begun to shift. People were becoming more humane. Goreng and Baharad decided that the ideal message to the administration would be a symbolic dish, a delicacy that would travel down the platform through all levels and return to the top, untouched. They chose panna cotta as the symbol, hoping to show that solidarity and restraint were possible. However, as they descended, they realized most people weren't willing to listen. forcing them to fight off attackers and share dwindling rations. The deeper they went, the more gruesome it became. Most levels were filled with corpses. It became clear that the woman's journey had likely started from these floors. They discovered a horrifying truth. The platform doesn't stop at floors with dead prisoners, meaning the pit was even deeper than they initially believed. Soon, they heard screams and the sounds of a struggle. They found the woman locked in battle with two heavily armed men. Despite her fierce resistance, one of them killed the woman, and the other wounded Baharad with a katana. Goreng tried to help her, but he was overpowered and came dangerously close to death. At the last moment, Baharad dragged him back onto the platform. When the platform finally stopped again, Goreng noticed a child hiding under the bed, a girl whose existence only her mother had believed in. As soon as they stepped off the platform, it descended further into the darkness, leaving them stranded on that level. Baharad continued to protect the panna cotta, though Goreng insisted it was pointless, since leaving food behind was forbidden. However, to their surprise, no punishment followed. The girl emerged from under the bed, starving, and Goreng offered her a piece of the panna cotta. She devoured it, leaving the two men without food and without their symbolic message. Exhausted and bleeding, Baharad succumbed to his injuries the next day. In a moment of desperation, Goreng had a revelation. The girl herself could be the message. Sending her to the top would show the administration something they never expected: a child surviving at the very bottom of the pit. With renewed purpose, Goreng placed the girl on the platform. As they descended into darkness, Goreng experienced a hallucination. His former companion, Trimagasi, appeared, telling him, "Your journey is over." Trimagasi reminded Goreng that he couldn't be part of the message, as his hands were stained by the things he had done. His presence would only taint the message. Accepting this truth, Goreng stepped off the platform, leaving the girl behind. He disappeared into the darkness with Trimagasi, who had now become a part of his own psyche. After some time, another set of prisoners were allocated to the prison. They were asked to select personal items and food they would like during their stay. A prisoner named Zamyatin, convicted for arson, requests pizza. His story begins on the 24th floor, where he shares his cell with Pimpoan, a disillusioned man who gazes mournfully at a pizza crust, stripped of its toppings by prisoners on the 21st floor. Zamyatin considers eating a chicken leg, but his neighbors upstairs, followers of the doctrine of equality, warn him against breaking the unspoken rule. Each prisoner may eat only the food they initially requested. The doctrine emphasizes fairness because prisoners rotate to random levels every month. Today's privileged could become tomorrow's starving, so discipline is crucial. Reluctantly, Zamyatin follows the rule and shares food with his neighbor. The platform descends, and the prisoners return to their routine until disturbing news arrives. The inmates on the 44th floor have stopped communicating about food distribution. Panic spreads. If the food doesn't flow correctly, starvation will follow, especially with 333 floors to feed. The prisoners decide to descend to the 44th and 21st floors to investigate. As the platform moves down, zealous inmates descend from the upper levels, starting a fight with those on the 21st floor. Zamyatin's neighbors warn him that he may need to join the uprising for survival. They advise him to arm himself with metal rods from their bed frames. Zamyatin prefers avoiding conflict, even though he still resents those who stole his pizza. When the platform reaches the 24th floor, they find no food, only a corpse. Suddenly, two more bodies are thrown from above. However, punishment arrives swiftly. A burst of cleansing fire, and the burning corpse falls onto the table. While Pimpoan extinguishes the flames, the two intruders continue fighting. Zamyatin freezes, overwhelmed, until a woman from his cell intervenes, helping him subdue one of the attackers. They frantically toss the food scraps back onto the platform, avoiding punishment just in time. The visitor from the upper floor, whom Zamyatin mockingly calls Rabbi Pierre, lectures them about a mythical teacher who preached just distribution and sacrificed his own flesh to feed others. Inspired, Zamyatin suggests they eat the burned body in the spirit of self-sacrifice, but Rabbi Pierre, fearing temptation, throws the corpse into the pit instead. The next day, during the meal, Zamyatin watches Rabbi Pierre discard the rations of the dead to avoid creating inequality. He places a prisoner from the 21st floor on the platform and descends with him, seeking the anointed one foretold by the doctrine. A day later, Pimpoan also begins discarding others' rations under Zamyatin's suspicious gaze. However, secretly, Zamyatin feasts on forbidden food, breaking the rules he pretends to follow. Every day, the same routine unfolds. The prisoners observe the platform descend with food, hoping it will reach the lower levels. They spread the message of fairness to other inmates, ensuring that each person eats only what was requested to maintain order. Over time, they learn to help one another, occasionally sharing their own portions. On their final day on the 24th floor, Zamyatin opens up. He reveals that he was once a mathematician, but abandoned his career after becoming disillusioned. Theoretical mathematics, he says, allows for solutions that don't work in real-world conditions, and that frustrated him. That evening, news comes from below. For the first time, the food has reached the 175th floor. Jubilant, Pimpoan invites Zamyatin to dance, and to his surprise, Zamyatin agrees. However, the joy doesn't last long. The next morning, they wake up on the 180th floor. Here, the reality is grim. Many inmates are starving. The communication chain breaks at the 169th floor, and Zamyatin becomes anxious, hoping the followers of the law of equality will keep the system in check. But doubt gnaws at him. The higher mortality rate suggests that many new inmates have been assigned to the upper floors, likely replacements for those who died below. Every day, the platform arrives on their level, empty, carrying only discarded utensils. All they have left is to listen to the zealots talk about love and justice, but words cannot fill empty stomachs. Zamyatin's health deteriorates from hunger, and Pimpoan cares for him as best as he can. One day, a severed head falls through the shaft. It's a grim reminder that those who break the rules are punished severely. Shortly after, another head drops. The guards above are executing violators who ignored the law of equality. Among the prisoners targeted is a glutton from the 24th floor, who shamelessly ate the food of dead prisoners without remorse. To protect Zamyatin, Pimpoan lies when questioned by their neighbors, claiming they were previously on the 46th floor. That night, the two prisoners share the same bed, trying to stay warm. As Zamyatin drifts off to sleep, memories resurface. He recalls the interview that led to his imprisonment. It dawns on him that he had lied to Pimpoan about everything, including the real reason for his arrest. Zamyatin's life had crumbled, his business plans failed, his family disowned him, and his parents sent him to prison to teach him discipline. Burdened by guilt, hunger, and hopelessness, he makes a fateful decision. One day, he stands at the edge of the shaft and asks Pimpoan, who has just woken up, to visit his children after her release. Then, he sets his blanket on fire with the lighter he was allowed to bring into prison and jumps into the abyss. Zamyatin falls like a meteor through the levels, cheered by prisoners on his way down. His body crashes onto the pile of trash at the bottom, where a crowd of broken people waits, a grim testament to the prison's brutal cycle. Pimpoan wakes up on the 51st floor the next day. Other prisoners inform her that the levels up to the 71st floor are occupied either by zealots or newcomers, which means the power dynamics are still manageable. She finds herself sharing the floor with a one-armed woman, a newcomer unfamiliar with the prison's unwritten rules. Soon, they learn that a barbarian prisoner, who was on the 2nd floor last month gorging on food, has now descended to the 54th floor, consuming everything he can. Pimpoan, driven by rage over Zamyatin's death, wants to descend and punish him. However, the prisoners below urge patience, reminding her of the laws of communication. 4 prisoners from the levels above must first descend to maintain the chain of order. At night, Pimpoan lies awake, flicking the lighter lid, the only thing left of her former cellmate. His presence haunts her, lingering in her thoughts. Meanwhile, her one-armed companion breaks the bed to create a weapon. Together, they jump onto the platform, ready to seek justice. On the floor below, another prisoner joins their mission, leaving his partner behind to maintain communication. The group of 5 continues downward, picking up 2 more prisoners on the 53rd floor. They are now ready to confront the barbarian. When they reach him, the barbarian immediately attacks, using a makeshift weapon. He kills one of the men in a matter of seconds. Soon, only 3 women with clubs remain to fight him. The barbarian leaps onto the moving platform trying to escape, but they chase him down. Pimpoan follows close behind, and another prisoner from the 50th floor joins the fight. The barbarian uses his improvised weapon to strangle the new ally. Pimpoan manages to knock the barbarian unconscious with her club, but she hesitates when he begs for mercy. Her hesitation gives the barbarian just enough time to crawl onto the platform as it descends to the next level. The one-armed woman wants to pursue him, but Pimpoan holds her back. It becomes clear that Pimpoan is still new to the prison and hasn't yet fully grasped the brutal reality of life there. They decide to stay on the 50th floor with one of the surviving prisoners, a man with Down syndrome. The one-armed woman reveals that she has been in the prison for 6 months and has always followed the law, helping to quell uprisings. She recounts a grim story. Once, she and her companion encountered a starving man to whom they gave the portion of a dead inmate. For this act of kindness, they were hunted down by the Anointed One, the most devout enforcer of the law of equality, Dagin Babi. The one-armed woman recounts a horrific memory. Once, the prison administrators tied her companion to the platform and sent her down to the lower levels, where she was eaten alive by starving prisoners. The woman herself survived but had her arm cut off. She explains to Pimpoan that following the rules and the law of the loyalists won't help them escape. The only way to survive is to flee during the interval when prisoners are moved between levels. During the transfer, prisoners are put to sleep using gas. They just need to stay awake somehow. The next day, the platform arrives with the barbarian prisoner tied beneath it. Alongside him comes the blind anointed one, Dargin Babi, accompanied by his entourage. As a reward for their obedience and zeal, Dargin Babi offers the women extra rations, allowing them to eat more than their share. However, the reward comes with a cost, punishment for breaking the law by interpreting it instead of blindly following it. For the one-armed woman, this marks her second violation, a serious offense. Suddenly, a neighbor prisoner mutters something to Dargin Babi, revealing that he overheard the women planning an escape. Although the young man misinterprets some of the details, Dargin Babi takes the information seriously. The following day, the enforcers return. They cut off Pimpoan's hand and strip her companion naked, tying her to the platform and sending her down to the lowest levels, where the hungriest prisoners await. After the enforcers leave, Pimpoan drifts off into a strange dream. She sees children playing on a slide, forming a chaotic pile at the bottom, where no one respects the idea of taking turns. When Pimpoan wakes up, she finds herself on the 71st floor with a new cellmate, Trimagasi. She advises him to avoid talking with prisoners from the upper or lower levels. Curious, she asks what item he brought with him to prison. Trimagasi reveals that he brought a kitchen knife. When Pimpoan politely asks to borrow it, he hands it over without resistance. Soon, the platform arrives. As it descends, Trimagasi begins eating, ignoring the law about rationing food. Pimpoan, now armed with the knife, steps onto the platform and suggests that Trimagasi descend with her. She now doesn't want to follow any law and be free. The pair descend level by level, recruiting new allies while clashing with those loyal to the written law. As the platform becomes crowded, Pimpoan orders some of their group to take defensive positions to prepare for incoming threats. During their descent, Pimpoan recognizes the barbarian she had intended to punish earlier, the same one she had spared and allowed to escape. Morning begins with kitchen utensils flying through the shaft, thrown by the followers of equality. They continue their descent toward the lower levels. Meanwhile, Dargin Babi's plan becomes clearer. He orders that all the food be distributed evenly, according to his strict, unyielding interpretation of the law. The platform descends empty, leaving the rebels weakened by hunger. The idea is that, when they are sufficiently weakened, guards from the upper levels will descend to kill them. The anointed one, Dargin Babi, is not concerned about how this will affect the prisoners below. However, he offers the rebels a deal: surrender, and only the ringleaders will be punished. The rebels, however, propose an alternative plan: descend to the lower levels and devour the loyalists stationed there. During this tense moment, Pimpoan recalls the reason she was sent to prison. At one of her art exhibitions, a young boy accidentally cut himself to death on one of her sculptures. Although the court ruled it an accident, the artwork was sold for millions. Despite being absolved legally, the artist chose to imprison herself in search of atonement. As the rebels prepare to descend, the loyalists arm themselves for the fight. They reinforce their platform with mattresses to cushion their descent. A bloody battle ensues, with makeshift weapons, sharpened objects, knives, metal rods, clubs, and sheer rage used in the chaos. In the middle of the battle, the barbarian, driven by vengeance, tries to strangle Pimpoan, but she grabs the knife she had hidden earlier and stabs him in the side. By the time the platform reaches the bottom, only a few survivors remain among the pile of bloodied corpses, including Dargin Babi, now wounded. After the battle, Pimpoan devises an escape plan. She swallows part of a painting coated with oil-based paint to poison herself and lose consciousness, hoping the guards will mistake her for a corpse and dispose of her during the monthly interval when the dead are cleared. While unconscious, she has another dream: children playing King of the Hill, with the winner carried off by an adult couple. When Pimpoan regains consciousness, she finds herself tied to a pile of dead bodies, being transported in zero gravity toward the 333rd floor, the prison's lowest level. She manages to free herself from the ropes and hides under a bed, observing the guards. She notices that the guards have secured a young boy, the same one from her dream, on a bed. The boy, crowned the winner of the children's game, is being prepared to ascend to the surface. On this level, children are regularly replaced, and very few prisoners manage to find redemption by saving them. Overcome with emotion, Pimpoan feels compelled to rescue the boy. She crawls toward the bed to pull him from under the blanket and save him. Just before losing consciousness again, she imagines the boy lying on a table, while the spirits of the prisoners she saw die offer her a knife, encouraging her to eat the boy to survive. Pimpoan wakes up on an empty platform, descending into the darkness of the 333rd floor. A faint light shines from above, and she sees a group of dead prisoners approaching her. They politely invite her to join them and not interfere with the boy's ascent to the surface on the platform. In a moment of clarity, Pimpoan decides to let the boy ascend, believing that his innocence and purity are essential for making the world a better place. By making this selfless choice, she finally frees herself from guilt and escapes her personal hellish existence. Thanks for watching. This is Buff Recap signing off.